The compound kept moving. Outside the shattered walls of the building, wolves were still fighting across blood-soaked concrete. Gunfire cracked somewhere near the eastern perimeter. Rogues shouted orders that nobody was listening to anymore. Pack warriors answered with snarls, claws, and steel as the night slowly turned into something nobody, on either side, would ever forget. But inside that room, everything had changed. Kazryn stayed where he had landed after Amara's command, his massive paws planted firmly in cracked concrete, while blood slid through midnight black fur and disappeared into the dust at his feet. His chest rose hard. His storm-gray eyes stayed locked on one place. One woman, one bond, one truth. Changho felt her before he looked at her. The connection between them had spent hours feeling fractured, distant, and almost impossible to hold on to. Now it burned through him with absolute clarity. He felt her heartbeat. He felt the exhaustion in her muscles. He felt the bruises forming around her wrists. He felt the adrenaline still moving through her blood. And deeper than all of it, he felt her certainty. She wasn't reaching for him anymore. She was standing with him. Kazryn slowly rose to his full height, muscles rolling beneath fur as pieces of broken concrete shifted beneath his weight. The bite wound across his shoulder was still bleeding. He didn't care. The cuts across his ribs still burned. He didn't feel them, because every instinct inside him had shifted. The war outside still mattered. Behoon still needed to die. But right now, the only thing Kazryn cared about was her. Amara stood beside the broken chair with blood smeared across her wrists and the steel restraints hanging uselessly from one hand. Her breathing had steadied. Her shoulders had lowered. And when her dark eyes met Kazryn's, Changho felt something move through the bond that nearly brought him to his knees. Trust. Complete. Unshaken. And given freely. Kazryn lowered his head slightly. The movement lasted less than a second. Most humans would have missed it. Most wolves wouldn't have understood it. Every wolf tied to Changho's bloodline felt it instantly. Outside, Taejin lifted his blood-covered muzzle toward the building. Sable froze as her glowing eyes narrowed toward the shattered doorway. Neither of them needed words. Neither of them needed confirmation. The bond had already told them everything. Their alpha had found his mate, and his mate had answered. Back inside the room, Varkos shifted his weight. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Kazryn caught the change in scent immediately. Behoon's wolf had smelled it too. The confidence was still there. The aggression was still there. But underneath both, caution had arrived. Changho felt Amara notice it through the bond. He felt the way her pulse stayed calm. He felt the sharp focus in her thoughts. He felt the woman he had spent too long protecting finally realize she had never been fragile. She had only been waiting to understand what lived inside her. Kazryn's growl rolled through the room, deep enough to vibrate through concrete and bone alike. It wasn't aimed at Varkos. It wasn't aimed at Darius. It wasn't even aimed at Behoon. It was a promise, a claim, a message carried through every wolf connected to him. And every single one of them understood it. She stands with us. Han smiled through blood and exhaustion. Jisoo's grip tightened around her blade. And across the compound, rogue wolves started realizing the hostage they had taken was never just a hostage. She was their Luna.
Amara's POV. Darius was the first one to break. Amara heard it before she saw it. His breathing had grown, uneven ever since she snapped the restraints from the chair. His pulse had been climbing with every second Kazryn stayed standing. With every second Changho refused to look away from her. And with every second the room kept reminding him that he was no longer the most dangerous man in it. Fear had a sound. And after tonight, Amara knew exactly what it sounded like. Darius pushed himself off the floor too quickly, nearly losing his balance as he backed away from the two alpha wolves in the room. His eyes kept moving. To Changho, to Kazryn, to the broken steel, to the mark on Amara's neck, then back to her. And every time his eyes landed on her, his breathing got worse. This, he swallowed hard. This isn't you. Amara kept her eyes on him. She didn't move, didn't rush him, didn't fill the silence for him. Changho had taught her that too. Truth usually came out when people were left alone with their fear. And Darius, just like always, couldn't stand silence. He pointed at her with a shaking hand. You don't belong here. His voice cracked hard enough that even he heard it. You're not one of them. Amara felt Changho through the bond, felt his attention, felt Kazryn's interest, felt the pride neither of them were even trying to hide. And somehow, that grounded her even more. Darius took a step toward her. Then another. The old version of him was coming back now. The controlling one. The one who thought volume made him powerful. The one who mistook fear for respect. You're coming home. He reached for her wrist. Now. His fingers never made it. Amara moved before he touched her. Months of training. Months of being watched. Months of Changho correcting her balance. Han teaching her where men left openings. Jisoo teaching her how hesitation got people killed. And Changho, showing her exactly how dangerous calm could become. It all came back in one clean movement. She caught Darius's wrist with one hand. Stepped into him before he could react. Twisted. Dropped her weight. And used his own momentum to send him flying over her shoulder hard enough to crack concrete when he landed. The sound that came out of him wasn't pain. It was disbelief. Darius rolled onto his back, gasping as blood filled his mouth from where his teeth had split against the floor. He stared up at her like he had never seen her before. Maybe, for the first time, he actually was. Amara walked toward him slowly. Her pulse stayed calm. Her breathing stayed steady. And when she stopped over him, Darius actually flinched. The realization hit her harder than the fight ever could. This man had once controlled entire chapters of her life. Her choices. Her confidence. Her voice. Her body. Her future. And now, he was afraid to even look her in the eye. Amara crouched until they were eye level. And when she spoke, her voice stayed quiet. Steady. Certain. Keep looking for the woman who needed your permission. Her eyes never left his. She died somewhere over the Pacific. Darius's throat moved as he swallowed blood. For the first time, he had nothing to say. Behind her, Changho smiled with Kazryn. And the feeling that rolled through the bond nearly made Amara's knees weak. Not because of lust, though there was plenty of that. Not because of possession, though Kazryn was practically vibrating with it. Because of pride. Pure. Unfiltered. Earned. And Amara, for the first time, felt exactly what it meant to stand beside an alpha, instead of behind one.
Changho's POV. The second Amara's voice moved through the bond, Kazryn stopped circling. Across the cracked concrete floor, Varkos saw the change immediately. His golden eyes narrowed. His scarred shoulders lowered. Every instinct inside the rival alpha knew exactly what had just happened. This was no longer a fight between two dominant wolves testing each other's strength. This had become personal. And personal fights rarely ended with both males walking away. Varkos moved first. He launched across the room with enough force to split broken concrete beneath his paws, jaws open, and aimed straight for Kazryn's throat. It was fast, violent, clean. A killing strike. Kazryn met him halfway. The collision shook the entire building hard enough to split one of the remaining support columns from top to bottom. Dust exploded through the air as both alpha wolves slammed into each other with enough force to make the walls groan around them. Outside the room, wolves stopped. Every member of Changho's pack felt the collision through the bond. Every rogue in the compound heard it, and every living thing nearby suddenly understood. Two alphas were trying to kill each other. Varkos twisted underneath Kazryn's weight and drove a powerful shoulder into his ribs hard enough to force space between them. Then he struck. Claws raked across Kazryn's shoulder. Deep. Blood hit concrete. Amara felt it instantly. The pain ripped through the bond so sharply it stole her breath. Her fingers curled. Her pulse jumped. And the mark on her neck burned hotter. Kazryn didn't back away. Didn't flinch. Didn't even blink. The storm-gray eyes locked onto Varkos with a calm that made the rival alpha hesitate for the first time all night. And Kazryn saw it. That single hesitation was all he needed. Kazryn exploded forward. He slammed into Varkos with enough force to lift the rival alpha completely off his paws before driving him through a steel equipment rack. Metal twisted. Bolts ripped free. Concrete cracked again. Varkos hit the floor hard. Rolled. Recovered. Blood dripped from his muzzle now. His breathing had changed. The arrogance was gone. The confidence was starting to crack. He charged again. This time with everything. No probing. No testing. No games. The two alpha wolves collided again in the center of the room, claws tearing through fur, muscle, and skin as jaws snapped inches from exposed throats. Blood sprayed across concrete walls. Snarls shook the building. Dust rained from the ceiling. And for several brutal seconds, neither male gave an inch. Then, Kazryn planted all four paws, lowered his center of gravity, and stopped moving, Varkos kept driving, kept pushing, kept burning through strength and momentum. And then, he realized too late. Kazryn had wanted exactly that. Kazryn drove upward with terrifying precision. Varkos's front paws left the floor. His balance disappeared. And before the rival alpha could recover, Kazryn's jaws closed around the side of his throat. Not deep enough to kill. Deep enough to control. Deep enough to remind him exactly whose woman he had threatened. Varkos snarled, twisted, clawed, fought. But the more he fought, the tighter Kazryn's hold became. Across the room, Kazryn's face finally changed. For the first time since this war began, the wolf looked afraid, because his human had already figured out what he hadn't. This wasn't a dominant alpha. This wasn't a territorial alpha. This wasn't even a revenge-driven alpha. This was a bonded alpha male protecting his Luna female. And those males didn't lose. Amara felt Kazryn's certainty surge through the bond like thunder. And for the first time, instead of reacting to his power, she fed it. The mark on her neck burned brighter, and Kazryn tightened his hold. Taejin and Jisu's POV. By the time the second support column cracked inside the main building, the entire compound had descended into chaos. Floodlights swung wildly across blood-soaked concrete. Sirens screamed through the night. Gunfire had become sporadic, desperate, and wildly inaccurate as rogue wolves started realizing this wasn't a raid. It was an execution. Taejin moved through the compound like a shadow that had finally grown teeth. His charcoal coat disappeared and reappeared between broken vehicles, shipping containers, and concrete barriers so quickly that rogues kept turning toward sounds that no longer matched where death was actually coming from. The first rogue never saw him. 1 second the male was barking orders from behind an overturned truck. The next, Taejin's jaws crushed through his throat, so cleanly the body hit the ground before the wolf even understood he'd been found. No hesitation, no wasted movement, no second strike. Taejin released the body and kept moving. 2 more rogues rushed him from opposite sides, thinking numbers gave them a chance. 1 came high, 1 came low, 1 mistake. Taejin pivoted hard, using the first male's momentum against him before driving his shoulder into the wolf's chest hard enough to fold ribs inward. The second male lunged for his flank, and caught nothing but air. Taejin spun with terrifying precision and clamped down across the rogue's spine. Bone snapped. The scream ended instantly. Across the yard, Sable was even worse. Moonlight caught blue undertones in her black coat as she moved through the battlefield with the terrifying calm of a female who had already decided exactly who was dying and in what order. She didn't rush, didn't waste energy, didn't snarl, didn't posture. She simply hunted. A rogue female tried flanking her from the left. Sable heard her before the paws ever touched concrete. She sidestepped at the last possible second, letting the attacker fly past her before sinking her jaws into the exposed shoulder and using the female's own momentum to slam her head first into a concrete barrier. The body dropped. Didn't move again. 3 more rushed her together. A mistake. Sable dropped low, slipped beneath the first strike, and tore through an exposed tendon before the male even landed. The second caught her shoulder. For half a second, long enough to regret it. Sable twisted, drove him into the ground, and crushed his windpipe beneath her jaws while the third wolf hesitated just long enough to realize. Too late. He should have kept running. He turned. Taejin landed on him before he made it 3 steps. Across the battlefield, the 2 wolves locked eyes. Blood covered both of them. Dust clung to their fur. Their breathing stayed calm, controlled, focused. Then, they heard it. Kazryn. The alpha male's rage rolled through the bond like thunder, carrying blood, dominance, and one unmistakable truth. The rival alpha was breaking. Taejin's amber eyes burned brighter. Sable's muzzle curled into something dangerously close to a smile. And without a single spoken command, both wolves turned toward the main building. Because if Kazryn was ending his fight, they were about to end the war. And every rogue still breathing suddenly realized they were running out of places to hide. Baehoon's POV. Varkos crashed across the concrete floor and slid through broken debris before forcing himself back onto his paws. Blood ran heavily down the side of his throat where Kazryn's jaws had torn into him moments earlier. His chest heaved now. His footing wasn't as stable. Every movement carried the strain of a wolf burning through strength faster than he could recover it. Across the ruined room, Kazryn stalked forward through drifting dust and shattered concrete without slowing once. Blood covered his black fur. None of it weakened him. If anything, the scent of battle seemed to sharpen him further. Varkos saw it, and for the first time since the fight began. Instinct warned him to retreat. The Behun lunged anyway. The collision rattled the building hard enough to shake loose chunks of concrete from the ceiling as both wolves slammed into each other again. Jaws snapped. Claws tore through fur and flesh. Blood sprayed across the walls. But the rhythm of the fight had changed. Varkos was reacting now. Kazryn was controlling the pace. Controlling the room. Controlling him. Kazryn twisted sharply and drove his full weight into Varkos's injured side. The Varkos roared as cracked ribs gave beneath the impact. A second later, Kazryn's jaws closed around the back of his neck and drove him face first into the concrete hard enough to crater the floor beneath him. The room shook. Dust exploded outward. And Varkos stopped fighting for half a second. That half-second terrified Behun. Behun shifted back violently. Bones snapped. Fur receded. And seconds later, Behun staggered backward in human form, blood pouring down his throat and chest as panic finally overtook whatever confidence he had walked into the compound with. His eyes shot toward Amara, toward the glowing mark on her neck, toward the woman standing beside the shattered restraints while Kazryn slowly turned toward him. And Behun understood the truth too late. He had not created weakness inside Kazryn. He had given the alpha male something worth becoming monstrous for. Behun's hand disappeared behind his back. The knife flashed into view. Amara saw it instantly. Her pulse jumped through the bond. Kazryn reacted before the man could fully move. The Kazryn launched across the room with enough force to split concrete beneath his paws. Behun barely raised the knife before Kazryn hit him. The impact sounded like bones breaking. Behun's body flew backward into the wall hard enough to crack the concrete behind him, before collapsing to the floor with the knife skidding several feet away across blood-covered stone. He tried to rise. Kazryn didn't allow it. He closed the distance in 2 massive strides and slammed one paw down across Behun's chest hard enough to pin the man completely. A scream tore from Behun's throat as claws punched through skin. Blood spread instantly beneath him. Kazryn lowered his massive head slowly until storm-gray eyes locked directly onto the man beneath him. And for the first time all night, Behun looked small. Outside the ruined building, wolves across the battlefield began slowing. Because they could feel it. The shift. The certainty. The ending. Back inside the room, Amara felt the rage moving through Kazryn like fire through the bond. But underneath the violence, she felt something even stronger. Relief. Kazryn had found her. She was alive. And now, nothing was leaving that room alive unless Kazryn allowed it. Behun tried reaching for the fallen knife. Kazryn's jaws snapped shut inches from his face. The man froze instantly, breathing hard, bleeding heavily, finally understanding exactly how close death had been standing this entire time. And Kazryn tightened his claws.
Amara's POV. Behun cried out when Kazryn's claws sank deeper into his chest. The sound echoed through the ruined room, sharp and ragged beneath the distant violence still tearing through the compound outside. Wolves were still fighting beyond the broken walls, but inside the building, everything had narrowed to the man pinned beneath Kazryn, the blood spreading across the concrete, and Amara standing close enough to feel the heat rolling from Kazryn's injured body. Kazryn looked terrifying. Blood matted his black fur. Deep wounds cut across his shoulder and ribs. Dust clung to the silver markings along his body, and his storm-gray eyes stayed fixed on Behun with a level of focus that made the room feel smaller. Amara stared at him, and the sight finally broke through the adrenaline that had kept her moving since she woke in restraints. He had come for her, not as an idea, not as some distant promise whispered through a bond she barely understood. He had torn through rogue territory, fought through an entire compound, and nearly lost himself because he believed she might be gone. The weight of that hit her so hard her throat tightened. "Kazryn," she said softly. His ears shifted toward her voice before his gaze did. He didn't move off Behun, but the bond changed the moment she spoke, turning toward her with the same intensity as his eyes when he finally looked up. Amara stepped closer. Behun struggled beneath Kazryn's paw, blood slipping from the corner of his mouth as he tried to pull in enough air to speak. "You think this ends anything?" he rasped. "You think finding her makes you untouchable?" Kazryn's growl deepened until the floor seemed to vibrate beneath Amara's feet. She should have been afraid of that sound. Instead, she understood it. The rage pouring through the bond wasn't mindless. It wasn't random violence. It was grief that had found a body to punish. It was fear that had finally found something it could sink its teeth into. It was love sharpened into something brutal because someone had dared to make him imagine a world without her in it. Amara moved beside him and lowered herself carefully, her knees brushing broken concrete. Her hand lifted toward his face, slow enough for him to see it coming, steady enough for him to feel the choice behind it. When her fingers touched the blood-matted fur near his jaw, the bond opened so wide she almost lost her breath. Everything he had carried rushed through her at once. She felt the emptiness that had nearly destroyed him when the bond went silent. She felt the panic that pushed him through the forest. She felt the rage that had driven him into the compound, the relief that had nearly broken him when he saw her alive, and the love underneath it all, so deep and consuming that it made her chest ache. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't pull away. "You came for me," she whispered. Kazryn leaned into her touch, and the low rumble that moved through his chest vibrated against her palm. The sound did more than comfort her. It reached through the bond and wrapped around the part of her that had still been shaking. Behoon coughed beneath him, his eyes moving between Amara and Kazryn as understanding finally settled over his face. He saw what he had created. He saw that Amara wasn't just leverage anymore. He saw that the bond he tried to break had come back stronger, deeper, and far more dangerous than he had planned. Amara saw it too. She felt the mark on her neck warm beneath her skin, but this time the heat didn't overwhelm her. It steadied her. It settled through her chest and down her spine until her breathing slowed, and the chaos outside no longer felt bigger than her. Outside the building, the fighting began to lose its rhythm. Taejin felt the shift first near the compound entrance. Sable felt it moments later near the eastern barricade. Across the battlefield, Kazryn's pack sensed the bond opening around Amara. Not as a command and not as a plea, but as recognition. Amara was no longer standing near the bond. She had stepped into it. Her fingers moved gently through Kazryn's fur, and his eyes closed for a brief moment beneath her touch. The sight nearly undid her, because there was nothing weak about him in that moment. Covered in blood and holding Behoon beneath his claws, Kazryn still trusted her enough to soften where only she could reach him. Behoon noticed that too. His breathing changed. For the first time since this began, Amara saw fear in his eyes that had nothing to do with pain. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid that his plan had worked too well. Amara looked down at him, her hand still resting against Kazryn's jaw. "You wanted to break him," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "You should have paid more attention to what you were waking up in me." Behoon's mouth tightened, but he had no answer. Kazryn's claws pressed harder into his chest, and Behoon's breath broke on a strangled sound. Amara felt the moment through the bond. The edge Kazryn was standing on, the thin space between justice and slaughter. She didn't pull him away from it. She didn't ask him to be gentle. She simply stayed with him inside it, letting him feel that she was alive, present, and no longer unreachable. That was enough. Kazryn's breathing steadied beneath her hand. Outside, the remaining rogues began to fall back. Some fled into the darkness beyond the compound, abandoning weapons and wounded alike. Others surrendered where they stood, lowering themselves to the blood-streaked concrete as Kazryn's pack closed around them. The war wasn't over. Behoon wasn't finished. But the night had turned. Amara felt it in the bond. Kazryn felt it beneath her hand. Every wolf still standing in that compound felt the same truth moving through the battlefield. The Luna had chosen her alpha, and now the pack knew her voice.
Changho's POV. The compound smelled like blood, rain, and surrender. By the time Changho stepped back into human form, the fighting outside had nearly stopped completely. The remaining rogues had either fled into the forest or been forced to the ground beneath the watch of Kazryn's pack. Emergency floodlights cast pale beams across shattered concrete and overturned vehicles while wounded wolves shifted back into human form throughout the compound. But Changho barely noticed any of it. His entire focus stayed on Amara. She stood several feet away from him near the ruined restraints, her dark hair disheveled, wrists bruised, and clothes streaked with blood and dust from the battle. The glowing mark at her neck had finally faded back beneath her skin, but Changho could still feel the bond moving between them like a living thing. Strong, steady, open. For the first time since she had been taken, he could breathe without feeling like his chest was collapsing inward. Amara looked at him quietly as he approached. The moment he reached her, her eyes moved over the injuries covering his body. Deep claw marks stretched across his shoulder and ribs, and blood still ran slowly from the bite wound near his side where Varkos had nearly landed a killing strike. Her expression tightened immediately. "You're hurt." Changho almost laughed at that. Not because she was wrong. Because after everything that happened tonight, the only thing she cared about in that moment was him standing in front of her bleeding. "I'll heal," he said softly. Amara's eyes searched his face for several long seconds, and whatever she found there made something inside her finally break loose emotionally. She stepped into him without warning. Changho caught her instantly. The force of her hitting his chest nearly knocked the breath from him, not because she struck hard, but because the feeling of holding her again after hours of believing he might never touch her alive nearly shattered what little control he still had left. Amara buried her face against his chest, and Changho wrapped both arms around her so tightly he knew he was probably holding her too hard. Neither of them cared. "You scared me," she whispered against his skin. The words hit harder than any wound he took in the fight. Changho closed his eyes briefly and lowered his face into her hair. "I know." His voice sounded rougher than usual, worn down by rage, exhaustion, relief, and emotions he wasn't even trying to bury anymore. "I couldn't feel you," he admitted quietly. "When the bond went silent." He stopped there because even now, saying the rest out loud felt impossible. Amara pulled back just enough to look at him. The emotion in her eyes nearly undid him. "I was still there," she whispered. "I kept trying to reach you." Changho's hand slid along her jaw carefully, his thumb brushing beneath her eye as he stared at her like he still needed visual proof she was alive. "You did," he said. "The second you called me, I heard you." Behind them, movement spread quietly through the compound as pack members slowly gathered near the ruined building. Han stepped into view first, blood covering one side of his face and chest while Jisoo followed close behind him, wiping blood from her blade. Several other wolves appeared farther back near the compound entrance. Every eye settled on Changho and Amara. No one interrupted. No one spoke. The entire pack felt the shift that had happened tonight. Amara noticed it too. Her fingers tightened slightly against Changho's shirt as she glanced toward the gathered wolves. "They're watching." Changho looked at his pack briefly before returning his attention to her. "Let them." Something warm moved through the bond the moment he said it. Not embarrassment. Not fear. Pride. The feeling hit Changho hard enough that his chest tightened again. Because Amara wasn't shrinking beneath the attention anymore. She wasn't trying to disappear from what she meant to him. She was standing beside him openly. And the entire pack could feel it. Changho lifted his hand slowly and brushed his fingers against the fading mark at her neck. The moment he touched it, the bond pulsed warmly between them. Amara inhaled softly. Her eyes lifted back to his instantly. "You marked me," she said quietly, as though she was still fully processing it herself. Changho's expression darkened slightly with memory. The night they were together rushed through him immediately. Her hands on him, the sound of her voice breaking beneath his mouth, the overwhelming instinct that drove him to bite her without fully understanding what he was doing. "I know," he said. Amara stared at him for another long moment before a small, emotional laugh escaped her. "I thought it was a hickey." For the first time all night, Changho smiled fully. The sight of it nearly stole her breath. Blood-covered, exhausted, bruised, and standing in the middle of a destroyed compound, but ass-naked, he still somehow looked unfairly beautiful when he smiled at her like that. "You have no idea how hard it was not to lose my mind when you said that," he admitted. Amara laughed again softly, and the sound alone made something deep in Changho finally unclench. Alive. She was alive. Still laughing. Still touching him. Still his. The bond swelled warmly between them as Changho rested his forehead against hers. Around them, the compound remained quiet. The pack watched silently. And one by one, wolves throughout the ruined battlefield lowered their heads toward Amara. Not out of fear. Out of recognition. Changho felt the exact moment Amara realized what was happening. Her breathing caught softly. His hand tightened around hers. And when she looked back at him, uncertainty flickered across her face for the first time since he found her. "What are they doing?" Changho held her gaze steadily. "They're acknowledging their Luna." The emotion that crossed Amara's face after that nearly destroyed him. Because this time, she didn't deny it.